Hello there, and welcome to Gooner U, where there are no degrees because the learning never stops. I'm Dove, a TA here at Gooner U, and my friend Keith is our stalwart distinguished professor of Arsenal and football studies. Enter our classroom as we discuss the week's news involving Arsenal, Premier League, Champions League, and especially this week, international football, all from the perspective of a couple Americans. This week did feature no Arsenal matches during the October international break, which we will be covering shortly. How you doing, Keith?
Hi, Dove. I don't have anything really pithy to say about this. It was an international break, so there wasn't that, well, ideally there's not that much going on. We have some things that went on, which isn't great, but we'll talk about that.
Yeah, I had some fun this week. I've been working when I do. So when we post our video, like our main hour-long full episode for the week, that pretty much goes up more or less as is, right? But then when I do the shorts that come out Tuesday through Friday across a variety of social platforms that support short video content, including YouTube, Instagram, X/Twitter, and what's the fourth one that I can't think of? That may be it. Threads. That's right. So we post all those. And when I do those, I've been trying to incorporate video into them. And of course, it's kind of a cat and mouse game. Can I find clips that I trim the edges off of enough and provide a short enough clip from that I don't get flagged by Instagram or YouTube or the main ones that are checking that. But I had a different challenge with the short that we posted on Friday that was talking about the article that was kind of a retrospective with Ramsdale looking back at last season with, being overshadowed by Raya, who had come into the club. I really wanted to show a clip of Ramsdale on the bench because that was one of the things that the article talked about was how he's sitting on the bench and that the video feeds would very often show him every time anything happened featuring Raya, they would cut to Ramsdale on the bench. And that was something his wife pointed out to him. So I wanted to find that. But of course, that's not going to be in the highlights reels where I usually get stuff from. And the highlights reels are from last season are all still up there because why not? But you need to go to the full match replays to try and get that particular footage. And the full match replays aren't up there anymore. So I was looking okay, all the NBC ones, they take them down after 30 days or something like that. I looked in Paramount Plus and they had some full match replays from last season Champions League still up. And I figured, okay, maybe I can find that. Well, okay. They had a kind of sampling of best of from the group stage, I guess. And I didn't see anything else beside that, at least in the app. I couldn't find it. So I was looking through the one Arsenal match they had from the group stage, which was home versus Long. And I played through almost the entire thing at 4x speed, just kind of looking for that one shot, which I never ended up finding. I ended up having to go stills instead of video for Sean Ramsdale on the bench in that one. But it was all worth it just to see the 6-0 trouncing of Lons I'd totally forgotten about in between, where we're up ahead 5-0 and then we get a penalty kick and make it 6-0. That was a bonus. I had totally forgotten.
That was a fun game. Now that you mention it, it was a fun game.
Yeah. So by way of more follow-up from last week, so I said something kind of silly when we were talking about how far forward Martinelli was leaned as he made that insane run to knock in the perfect shot that Saka gave teed up for him. I said he was leaned over 30 angles. I obviously meant 30 degrees, and I couldn't believe when I was listening back that I heard myself say 30 angles instead of 30 degrees. Something else that we talked about was I had asked about what the rule is as far as where the opposition needs to stand when a team is taking a goal kick. And I'll have a link in the show notes from the FA.com, which is the English FA's site. Of course, they call themselves the FA, like there is no other FA.
They are the original. They can get away with it.
Sure. I'll allow it. But yeah, so they have law 16, I believe it is, the goal kick. And this is just describing that, yeah, the opposition team must stay outside the 18-yard box until the ball is in play, which is some combination of being struck by a player and struck by a second player. It has something to do with that. And I didn't care enough to know exactly what moment it is okay for them to enter. I'm not an official. But yeah, so that's the rough idea. They do need to stay outside the 18-yard box while the ball stays inside the 6-yard box. So there's a natural 12-yard buffer. So
right, it's just their copy. You should say it's not the FA's rule. This is their copy of the laws of the game. So this is
sure, okay, yep,
rule that we see across.
exactly.
The nice thing about this one, of course, is it's in English, which means we can read it.
It is English and in English, yes.
Yeah.
So how did the U.S. fare in the international break with their friendlies?
Right. So yeah, we record on Sunday night, so we are less than 24 hours. We are a day after the debut of Mauricio Pochettino as the U.S. manager, which was a 2-0 defeat of Panama, which sounds like the kind of thing you shouldn't be too thrilled about, but recall that it was a loss to Panama that effectively doomed us in the Copa America this summer. We've had some tough results against Panama in the very recent past. So it was nice to kind of get out there and get one. It's not as if there was a massive sea change. Pochettino's been the manager, officially since it's been about a month since he was named manager. He's now gotten 2 practices in with the team. It's not like he did, or not quite, but he hasn't really done a lot with the players except talk to them, so to work with them. So it's not as if you were going to see something terribly different in this game than what we would have seen from the last couple of times out, but they were fine. They generated some opportunities. Yunus Musa scored his first goal for the U.S., which he's not really a goal scorer. I think someone saw it somewhere. He scored 4 goals in his club career. He's currently at AC Milan with Pulisic. That's not really what he does, but nice to see him on the score sheet. And then Ricardo Pepi got a second one late to sort of seal the deal, as it were. So 2-0 win. Slightly diminished with some injuries, so not exactly a top tier lineup, but a solid performance. Matt Turner had to made a double save at one point, but for the most part, we played well. We were fine. We were good, and it's nice to win.
Yeah.
We'll follow that up. So here's a fun little note. So we're gonna follow that game up. We're gonna play an away game against Mexico on Tuesday, which is a bit unusual. Usually Mexico chooses to play us in the U.S., usually somewhere in the Southwest, Texas, California, Arizona, Vegas, somewhere like that, where, of course, there will be 70% Mexican fans in the stadium, but who cares? All the tickets are sold and everybody gets rich. This time, however, they're going to go down to Guadalajara to play a game, play a friendly at Mexico, so that'll be interesting to see. We are going to be even a little bit more diminished. Several players, including Pulisic, as well as Weston McKennie, who didn't play on Thursday or on Saturday, and Ricardo Pepi, who scored, plus a couple others, have all been sent back to their clubs due to what are called minor injuries. Which I suspect there's some relationship to these. I say a relationship between what we see here and what we saw, for example, with Kai Havertz. Havertz did not report to Germany this break. He was nursing an injury. I'm sure he's not healthy. We're into the season. Everybody's got little little knocks and whatnot. But is he injured, or is it just a chance to take a weekend off when Germany decides, we don't really need you right now for this one, and you're supposed to take care of it. But, there's a lot of negotiation that goes on between the club managers and the national team managers. And so in this case, 5 players, Pulisic, Weston McKennie, Ricardo Pepi, Marlon Fossey, and Zach Steffen have all been sent back to their clubs for, quote, continued evaluation and treatment after sustaining minor injuries. Some of this is also related to their own load management. I suspect some of this was predetermined. But 20 players will go down to Guadalajara, and we'll see how that goes. It's a friendly, so it doesn't really matter. But it's Mexico, so let's win 2-0.
Yeah. How is Japan doing in the AFC World Cup quals?
Right, switching over to World Cup qualifying. Japan picked up a win 2-0 against Saudi Arabia on the road, which, by the way, now through how many games did they play in the last round? Was it 6 games in the first round of qualifying, and now 3 games in this round of qualifying? Japan has not only won all 9 of those games, they have yet to concede a goal in any of those games.
Wow.
So Japan's feeling themselves. They're doing pretty well right now. Yeah, things are going pretty well.
Yeah.
And they'll follow that up home in Saitama against Australia on Tuesday, which that should be probably one of the tougher games, Australia. But right now it's hard to pick. Right now, I think Japan's in pretty good shape to qualify for the World Cup, and I think they're in pretty good shape to top that group. So
Sure. And in case anyone has been intently following our international updates but missed last time, India has been eliminated from AFC. So I have no team, to be following.
Well, not
But
Asia anyway.
In Asia, in AFC. So meanwhile, how's CONMEBOL doing?
Yeah, CONMEBOL's up to match days 9 and 10. They've had match day 9 this week. Colombia was at Bolivia. They lost in Alto, Bolivia, their first loss of qualifying for the Cafeteros. Bolivia currently sits in a World Cup qualifying spot, which is not something I think a lot of people would have expected, but there they are. So, you know, still not a great result if you're Colombia, but top 6 are making it to the World Cup, and Colombia is currently in second.
Right.
So probably going to be okay. But they'll be home in the next game against Chile, who sits currently dead last. They have not had a good qualifying. But from the bottom of the table up to the top, how about your shirt for today? How about the defending champions?
Yeah, they played away at Venezuela. So 2 national teams I've actually seen play, though not each other. So that's fun side note. But Argentina drew at Venezuela. So, I guess the draw away, win at home formula that, they're doing okay and certainly will not fall out of a top 6. But it's not surprising. Venezuela seemed to be a good team when you and I saw them play. So it's, yeah.
Decent. Away to Venezuela can be difficult. The goal I see was Solomon Rondon, who, as I recall, if I'm recalling correctly, is the guy who scored in the game we saw.
Okay, yeah.
That was him. Slightly older captain, all the time leading goal scorer. Yeah, that's him. For Venezuela. So yeah, I mean, not a bad result. And Argentina. Who is Argentina have next?
I did not catch that. Yeah.
Hold on. Yes, I see it. They are home to Bolivia. So
okay.
Well, Bolivia's got quite the sequence of games this time. Colombia and Argentina. But,
Yep. So if we were to head over to the tropics, what's going on in Oceania?
Right, Oceania. So quick note here. We talked about this last time. Oceania is currently in a group stage, 2 groups of 4 teams each. They'll play each other once, so 3 games, 1 in this break and 2 in the November break, and then the top 2 teams will advance to a knockout tournament, which will be in March for qualification to the World Cup. So, Fiji, my Fijians, beat the Solomon Islands 1-0 in a game played in Fiji. It's interesting. So for Group A, where Fiji is, the first games in this break were played in Fiji, and then the next 2 games in the November break will be played at Papua New Guinea, including Fiji's next game against Papua New Guinea. On the other side, though, Group B was in Vanuatu. But what about your Tahitians?
Yeah, so they did not fare so well in their opening match against the powerhouse that is New Zealand within Oceania. So it was not great. It was a 0-3 loss. But it's one game. Hopefully they have time to bounce back. We'll see how it goes.
So that was in Vanuatu. So I see the next 2 games in that group will be in New Zealand. That's a very strange way to do that, with the games in the different places. Anyway, what's interesting to me about it, or I guess what I'd say is the bright spot for Tahiti's perspective is New Zealand is clearly the best team in Oceania. So to have already played them, their next game is against Samoa, who's probably the weakest team in the tournament remaining in the Confederation, and then you've got Vanuatu potentially for a winner take all for that qualification spot. Fiji's got New Caledonia and Papua New Guinea. Both of them still very much alive. I think there's still a lot of space for this to get interesting. And then they'll be in New Zealand. hopefully they'll both be in New Zealand in March for the final stage of qualification.
Before we leave the World Cup qualifications, one brief tangent that I think is worth a few minutes. So I've been spending more time recently playing video games with my son, and it's been fun. We've been playing some retro games together too. So I introduced him to GoldenEye, which I watched a documentary about, and it kind of rekindled my interest in it. And he's taken up an interest in the multiplayer split screen mode, trying to kill me as many times as he can. But while we were looking through other retro games on the Nintendo Switch, we saw Super Soccer for the Super Nintendo system. So we played that a little bit, and that was kind of funny. It's just international teams. All the players who you might be are just first names. So I don't know if those were actual players from what I'm seeing was 1991 when the game originally came out in Japan. I don't know if they're actual names or if they're just archetypal German or Brazilian or whichever team you're playing as. But that was kind of fun. You set the formation is really the main strategic decision. You can swap out players, but it's mainly they give you like, I don't know, a dozen. And actually in Japan, it was called Super Formation Soccer. So that was kind of a funny name. Like they were really proud of this, that like it will actually set up the formations for you. And it's a weird perspective for an SNES game. It's like it's like the wire camera over the field. Like, but it's only ever facing toward the one goal. So when you're trying to score on the near goal, it's like you can't see the goal sometimes when you're shooting at it. Kind of interesting. But anyways, what's the story with England over this break?
Right. So this is where we pull back to the Arsenal story, which is a little bit darker, unfortunately. So England lost their game I think it was on Friday. They played against Greece. But I don't really care about that. What I do care about is that shortly after halftime, Bukayo Saka, our very special lad, Bukayo Saka had to come off with an injury, limped off the field at Wembley. The initial report said something potentially about a hamstring. We don't know. What we do know is that he was sent home. He did not go to Finland for their where they played. I guess they played Finland today. I didn't really care because so Thursday they played Greece and they lost, which is a bit of a shocking result to begin with. But when he did not travel with them to Finland this weekend, he went back to Arsenal. I guess we'll see. You know, I don't know.
Troubling.
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite what we saw with Calafiori. It's certainly not as bad as what we saw with Odegaard.
Yeah.
But not great. And so hopefully we'll see. We have a week. Hopefully it's nothing. Hopefully it's not a serious thing. And we'll see I'll see how it goes.
Yeah. I hope he has a speedy recovery. What's coming up soon with MLS? How's MLS doing? They're getting toward the end of their season, right?
Right. So they took off for the international break. Well, mostly a couple teams played a few games to get caught up. So everybody sans Toronto is currently on 33 games. The 34th, the final game of the regular season, will be on Saturday, what MLS calls Decision Day. Because sure, why not? All the Eastern Conference teams will play each other at the same time, starting at the same time in the afternoon, and then all the Western Conference teams will play each other in the evening, and that will sort of just determine the final standings of the regular season. So we know Miami, of course, has won the Supporter Shield. I believe a win would give them the all-time points record for a single season. So there's an interest there. New York City and Houston, the two teams I sort of keep an eye on, are both they're both in the playoffs. New York City has an outside shot at finishing fourth, but I think is very likely to play Orlando in the playoffs. And then Houston is part of kind of a mess of teams in the Western Conference. I think technically there's still a chance they could finish in the 8-9 game, but I think that would require a lot of really bad things to happen. Bad things from their perspective, of course. So I suspect they'll be there. But they've kind of, both those teams have had very up and down seasons in a lot of interesting ways. So we'll kind of see regular season ending, and then it's the playoffs, and then it's on the way to the Cup.
Yeah, very exciting. So from your knowledge and perspective, what more could we be doing in the United States to foster elevation of MLS? What could we be doing to increase our stature and skill level on the world stage?
Boy, we don't. That's an episode or a series unto itself. I think a couple of things. One, I think from a fan's perspective is, like, tell people support your local. Like, go see the local team. Like, if you live in a city, you live in somewhere that has a team, like, go to those games. I think the other thing, or two other things we could do. One, I think, is increase the amount of the academies available. So we should have opportunities for kids or younger players to get that experience, especially working with professional coaches, because that's kind of the, not to throw shade at any coaching dads that may be listening to / on this show, but to get that chance of professional coaching. But of course, that leads us to, I think the other important thing is we need good coaching in this country, and not that we don't have it, but we just need more of it. And that, I think, sort of sets us up to a thing. I discovered this last week, and I sent it to you. Apparently, a bunch of MLS coaches, both senior team but also academy youth level coaches, have been taking classes or taking a course at Clairefontaine, the French national team's academy. And well, I don't know. I have never taken a coaching course, so I'm kind of curious your thoughts as having read this piece as someone who has taken coaching classes.
Right.
What did you see or get out of that?
Well, so there's a few things. I mean, for one thing, as far as what they were talking about for just kind of the phrase that coaching courses always use, lacrosse, soccer, I've done both. So U.S. soccer, and I think it's USA lacrosse. I think they put the A in there. Growing the game. They're always talking about growing the game. How do you grow the game? And with what this article that we'll have a link to in the show notes for The Athletic, what a couple things that they were talking about was, first of all, not having a barrier to entry, where in a lot of countries, they didn't get into details about it, but basically said that you don't need to pay money to join a league to get your kid to play and be better. That, the next Messi, the next Saka, the next Mbappe, like, they could be somebody who has no money and would be excluded from that and therefore would never rise to prominence if they're born in the United States, right? That's one thing with our local league that we are addressing pretty well, where basically anybody for whom the fee is a hardship, it's like zero effort, just check a box and it's free or greatly reduced, one of the two, for our local towns league.
Yeah.
That's one good thing. As far as the training of the players, we actually do, even at the lowest levels. So starting with like the 4, 5, 6-year-olds and continuing through as they get older, we actually do have professional training in addition to the volunteers like myself who are on the field. So the professional coaches that we have are there every week with the youngest kids, and then kind of every other week, or for us right now, it's like 2 out of every 3 weeks, training the coaches as far as how to, like, what kinds of drills to do, and then also directly working with the players to a great extent also. So that's all good. As far as the courses that I've done, for soccer, they've both been 7v7 courses. Now, I'm not coaching at the 7v7 level yet, but we do need to receive the certification, and that's the lowest level of course that we take. I think they probably do have a 4v4, which is closer to what we're doing, but I haven't taken that yet. But that experience pales in comparison, to put it mildly, to what these MLS coaches were put through, where they like question, should I even be coaching? Like, is this something that I am right for pursuing in the first place? Which is just crazy to me when you're someone who is doing this at the professional level, for you to even have that thought. I guess maybe I take for granted a certain level of confidence, or maybe it's the imposter syndrome that is a very common thing that everybody feels at some point. Like, am I doing the right thing? Even though you're clearly very skilled at it, people will feel that anyways. But it sounds like this is a very, very intense course meant to break you down and kind of rebuild you in a certain mold that looks at coaching through a certain lens, which sounds like it's been effective so far where it's been used.
Yeah, I do think, to the point of, should you be coaching? I don't think that it's a question necessarily of imposter syndrome. I do think you find a lot of, like, especially a lot of guys who start getting into coaching, a lot of them are ex-players who are like, it is an interesting question, right? Like, do you actually want to coach, or are you just like, well, I'm kind of here and I need something to do, and we talked about when we watched Bend It Like Beckham, the coach.
Right.
I mean, he was a former player, and you're kind of like, I don't know if they have anything else to do.
Mm-hmm.
Let's you stay around the game, let you work with players. But there's a difference between, okay, I can blow a whistle and, teach them a couple drills, and the kind of person who's going to be able to break down and work with them about what they need to do to improve both as individuals, but also as a team. And so you're talking about coaching as a profession, as opposed to like so in that sense, should you be coaching? Are you prepared to do the kind of things you need to do to work at that level, that kind of elite level? And so that's, I think, the kind of question they're asking them. Or are you here because a lot of them probably maybe haven't thought that much about it. Why are you coaching? Oh, I'm just kind of just kept going, why not?
Sure.
I stopped playing and I just wanted to keep doing it, and never really sort of considered, like, what do you want to get out of this?
Yeah, and they do focus on a couple particular coaches. Like the one woman who they're talking about is she was a former goalkeeper, and then goalkeeping coach, and then turned head coach, where she was eliminated from the game like fairly young, like around 20 or 21, I think they said, because of multiple concussions, where it was just too much of a risk for her to continue playing. So yeah, it sounded like, and for her it was kind of funny because her parents were teachers, or at least one of her parents I think was a teacher, they said in the article, where it was the kind of thing where she never thought that she wanted to teach, and then she realized, actually, no, this is perfect for me. Like, this is kind of where I belong.
Yeah, and as someone who's in education, like, they're like, it's a high burnout profession, because it's one thing to sort of say to yourself, oh, I'd love to be a teacher, and then you start doing it and you sort of see all the ancillary things that come around with it, and some of the difficulties, the challenges that you face, and there's a high burnout just because that's not something a lot of people are prepared to do. It's not a criticism of them, but there's just certain things you have to kind of be willing to do, to a certain degree, sacrifices you're willing to make for yourself, or alternately not. There's people who talk about, we've had a lot of conversations, professionally, about like boundaries, right? Like, there are times I won't check my email. There are things I won't do for students, and it's because it's healthy for you, and because it all comes back to, what is it you're doing this for? What is it you're trying to get out of this? And so I think that's a good question there. I don't know. I guess I kind of read the article. To me, I guess I was a little bit curious. I was a little bit more curious about, it felt like it was more about the experience of the Americans who took the course and their experiences, rather than anything particularly about the course itself, other than some of the mental aspects we talked about here. I don't know. Did that
they don't want to give it away, right?
I know you can't give the whole thing away, but I guess like, I don't know. Did you, you as someone who has sat through one of the, not this course obviously, but has sat through a coaching course before, did you pull anything out of it, or do you have a sense of, okay, I could maybe think of, even if you can't articulate it, perhaps some of the things they were doing?
Well, okay. So if you want my recollection of the things that are covered, like in the soccer course that I've taken, I mean, so there's a couple things. I mean, for one thing, they try to instill a play, practice, play mold for each practice session, where as kids are filing in, just have them scrimmage. It's pretty much hands off. Like, and a lot of this I do have to modify for the kids in my age group that right now they're like 7 and 8 year olds. They need us there sometimes saying, no, it's a throw in, it's a goal kick, whatever it is. They do need more involvement. Like when you're talking about 9 and 10 year olds, 11, 12 year olds, they're more self-sufficient. The idea would be in the first practice, or the first play, you play, practice, play. In the first play session, it's a scrimmage where you're not saying anything, you're taking notes. You have a theme for each practice where, okay, today we're working on defense in the final third, or we are working on winning the ball, or we are working on striking, whatever it is, you're working on some particular game phase. And that is the theme for your practice. You're going to have keywords that you're going to be using, right? And those keywords might be things like, heads up or open space or whatever, stuff like that. That to me, like, you're going to call out during the practice to remind them that that's what you're working on. But it also becomes a shorthand where during a game, you might use that same term, and that will recall what you've been working on during practice, where without joysticking them. Joysticking is a term that I learned in these training sessions where you're like treating your players like their characters in FIFA or something, where you're telling them exactly what to do, like dribble, shoot, pass. Like, I do that, and I probably should do it less. But again, depending on the age level, I feel like right now I'm still kind of guiding them more specifically, and I do try to cover why afterwards. In the moment, you're not going to say, "What are your options?" Like I'm not gonna guide them so much as like, "No, this is what you should be doing now," and I can explain why later, which I do. I generally do, but. So you'll have the keywords that you're tossing out, and you'll have specific in the practice section, you'll have specific drills that try to simulate game-like scenarios where you're going to cover those things. But in the first scrimmage, you're just taking notes where you see specific things along the theme that they've done that you want to work on, right? And you do your drills. And as hard as it is, like, if you're splitting your team, if you're doing a defensive drill, well, you're still going to have kids who are doing offense, right? It's part of the drill. Those kids who are doing offense, though, you don't want to be coaching them on how to be better at dribbling or whatever it is, because that's not the theme. And it's hard sometimes. You don't want to coach everything at once. You want to try and focus so that they can actually absorb the things that you want to cover during that session. So you'll do the, 2 to 3 activities that are minimal in time because at this age, especially like, short attention spans. But then once you are done with that practice session, then you go into a full scrimmage where you have like, the team split in half playing one full-sided scrimmage. And from there, that's where you have the whistle. And you can blow the whistle at any time to freeze them and say, okay, right now, I saw you shot the ball from midfield, to pick a recent example for my team, right? Why did you do that when there was open space in front of you? Like, what could you have done to make that shot go in the goal instead of giving the other team a goal kick? And you would actually freeze play at that point in time to get them thinking about, let them look around the field and have time to analyze, because they're in a practice. You can do this, have them analyze the situation in depth and start forming those thought patterns, which is similar to one of the particular things they talked about this course, which was trying to get players in the mindset of scanning the field. That is the most important thing for success as they get older, is just being aware of what's going on around them. And that's definitely something I see lacking, in this age group that I am trying to get them to learn to do. And something that you see at the professional level where, like, in Arsenal, like one person will receive the ball and they'll do like these series of one-touch passes without their head even turning toward who they're passing it to. They're able to do that because they're scanning the field. So it's like, it seems like those types of very fundamental things that people who have been coaching the sport for long enough know, these specific things will lead you to success. You need to train your players to start picking that up,
Okay. I mean, that's kind of the sense I've gotten. It's a lot of structural things about like how practices are run, but also like how drills are run, the kind of things you emphasize, how you communicate. That's an interesting bit about communication, right? How do you communicate ideas? And it's education and other guys. I do just want to say briefly on the point about what they call pay to play. Once you start getting to a level of skill, right now you're dealing with a recreational league, which is essentially just a younger version of what I did, which was, not particularly intense. But you are going to potentially get to the point where, if your son is good, or, it sounds like some of the kids he plays with are good. They're going to have opportunities for what we also sometimes call travel teams. And they are much more selective. They're meant to be elite. They're meant to be developed, and they will travel and compete regionally. I mean, I say regionally. I mean, we can talk about going to New England for you, into New Jersey, Pennsylvania, DC. I mean, that's not the craziest thing in the world. So in that sense, those are travel. Those travel. They have substantial fees attached to them. Right. And so you do lose a lot of those kids. Because the typical route for athletic development in the U.S. in a lot of cases is through the schools. Especially a big one, especially is football. Organized football is really only played there. I mean, there's outside camps and stuff, but in the end, it's high school football. And everybody attends high school, so you'll have your team, you'll have your opportunities. Even basketball has some like youth organizations, but there's a lot of there's a lot of other avenues to go through. With soccer, it's a little more limited unless you have the opportunity to go abroad when you're younger, a la Christian Pulisic, but very few Americans
Mm-hmm.
have those kinds of opportunities. Or you live close enough to an MLS academy that it becomes feasible to go there. I mean, we've mentioned Tyler Adams, who plays for the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
national team, came through the New York Red Bulls academy. I mean, he went to Ketchum, so in Wappingers, down near where you are. I mean, you can imagine driving every day from Wappingers down to Newark, New
Mm-hmm.
Jersey, and
That's a
that's
commitment.
essentially
Yeah.
that's what he did.
Yeah. That's a long
And
way.
it worked out for him. He's now making the big bucks in Europe and plays for the national team in the World Cup, et cetera, et cetera. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's again, we know. But as I say, most kids don't go pro.
Yeah.
That so.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, like our organization does do travel also, and we do our best to make scholarships available. Like we really
Mm-hmm.
do everything we can to make sure that price isn't a barrier for those to whom it would be.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's a good point. All right, bringing it back around to a little bit of kind of follow up from previous weeks. So I had asked. It was kind of funny. It came up when we were talking about the shirtless fans at the PSG match, right? And I asked, "Is that a Paris thing? Is that a French thing? Like, do other Paris teams do that?" I think, and we didn't have time to talk about it last week. But you pointed out that PSG is the Parisian team, apparently, right?
Yeah, there are a couple others in the lower divisions. I think one of
Right.
them is in the second division, has a chance at promotion, or has recently been in Liga. But yeah, um, yeah. So this kind of thing stems from another piece of the Athletic. The title says it all. London has several major football clubs. Why does Paris only have one? And the biggest answer, of course, is that the sporting culture in France and England are very different. And a lot of it stems also from where the sport came from. England, of course, we talked about the working class roots and all of that. In France, it was always a little bit more of an elitist sport, at least early on, because it was brought in by English emigres and people who spoke English, which, of course, within France is a very particular social strata. Um, Within France, there also seems to be that Ligue 1. We've talked about this is considered a Big Five league. Paris Saint Germain is a big club. Because they're owned by, I think, the nation state of Qatar. Olympique Marseille has had some good teams over the years. Olympique Lyonnais has been good. So there have been some solid French teams over the years. But PSG is a legitimate, many years is a legitimate, Champions League contender, and has won the French league something like 9 of the last 10 seasons, or something ridiculous like that. Yeah, but it is kind of interesting that in France, you just don't have the same kind of passionate following for Ligue 1 the way you do for the Bundesliga or La Liga or the Premier League or Serie A. Um, the great French players don't generally tend to stay in France; they tend to go abroad. A lot of them to Italy, plenty in Spain, plenty of them wound up in England in the Premier League.
One to Arsenal.
One to Arsenal. Arsenal's had a few over the years.
One right now, yeah.
Yeah, the famous line in 1998 when France won the World Cup, it was an English paper. The headline read "Arsenal wins the World Cup" because there were several Arsenal players on that team. Patrick Vieira, most famously, but Thierry Henry was on it. I think Robert Pires was as well. So anyway, yeah, the sporting culture in France is generally different, and the place that the sport holds in the society is different. The French generally tend to seem to be a one team per city town, as opposed to in London, the clubs have very deep roots, not just in London, but in particular neighborhoods in London. So we talk about Arsenal is North London, or Chelsea in West London, or things like that. Whereas you don't hear that in France, they're just the town, the club of the city. So Paris Saint Germain is the club for Paris.
Mm.
And really is the article says is an amalgamation of two different clubs, which is kind of a fascinating kind of look into two very different cultures. And as we talked about, France has a very good soccer culture. Obviously, they produce a tremendous number of talented players. Immigration, since in the late 20th century, early 21st century, has played a large role in that. but they produce excellent players. The quality of the league has generally gotten better through some investments, and obviously the national team has been very good over the last 25, 30 years.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. And yeah, I know the Saint Germain name came up watching the show Outlander. There's an interlude where they're in France and we meet like some lord whose name is Saint Germain. It's like, oh, I know that name. I know what his family's going to go on to do.
Choked before the end of the show. I'm not.
Anyways, one other thing I wanted to follow up on from prior episodes is we talked about, it was a couple matches ago, I think it was maybe against Leicester, where we had like some crazy high XG, the expected goals by the end of the match or something. And I wanted to see how much you could elucidate what it is and how it's calculated. So like if you take it at face value, like, okay, expected goals, how many goals are expected to score? Fine, but what are the inputs into that? And like what really got me thinking about this is, so wait a second, it changes over the course of the game. Like I could understand it more as something that you figure out based on whatever metrics going into a match, right? But they're recalculating it like in real time as stats happen. Like where does it come from?
So XG is largely going to be based. It doesn't so much change during the game as it accumulates. So XG is largely based on what they judge to be the quality of shots you're taking. So the idea is that if you say you've got Thomas Partey lining one up from the edge of the box, a shot from just outside the box is expected to score a certain amount of times based on not just the distance, but also the angle to the goal, and the type of shot that's taken. Is it with his foot? Is it with his head? Basically, how often should a player taking a shot from that position be expected to score?
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that over the course of the game, your XG will accumulate. Each shot is worth a certain amount of XG. And so when the game is over, you can look and say, okay, a team doing what you did, who took the number of shots you did and the places you did, would be expected to score this many goals
by the end of the match.
By the end of the game, would be expected to score this many goals, and it's a metric, or the way, and it's calculated different places will calculate it differently. So I can't just sit here and say, oh well, here's exactly how you do it. There's different sites have different metrics that they work with, but the idea, generally speaking, is that it can account for both shot quantity. Because we can both count shots, right? Say, oh, wow, Arsenal took like 25 shots and only, to 2. How did they only win 1-0? But you can also, so quantity also mixed with like quality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they took 20-something shots, or like we saw with the Spurs game, or City in the second half of our game up at the Etihad, right? They took a lot of shots, but they were all kind of from the outside. None of them seemed to get particularly close. And so the idea is, yes, you may have a lot of quantity of shots, quality is very low, and so okay, you weren't really as much of a scoring danger perhaps as that shot metric might suggest. At the same time, you could flip it the other way. Well, you only took a handful of shots. On the other hand, look, you managed to take them all inside the box, so you're clearly in a more dangerous place, or you're clearly generating more dangerous opportunities, and so perhaps maybe your play did result or should have resulted in something better than what you got.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, it's a way. It's an attempt to kind of quantify the flow of the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
To try to suggest how well certain teams are playing. Hockey does something a little similar with a stat called Corsi, which was actually just named after a guy named Corsi. But it's the idea of just counting, it's not just shots, which have always been calculated, but also counting block shots, shots that miss the net. And the idea is that a team that's generating more shots, even when they're blocked or missing the net, is controlling possession. And this was about, a decade or so ago. The big thing in hockey was possession. And how do you judge possession? Well, it's based on shots. The more shots you're taking, the more possession you have, especially if you're taking more shots relative to your opposition.
Right.
I think nowadays there's some XG as well, although the hockey goalie plays a different role in stopping shots than a keeper does in soccer. But yeah, the whole point of the XG thing is to sort of look and say, okay, just how is this game going? And so we can look at a Leicester game where Arsenal, their XG is through the roof. Leicester clearly doesn't really generate many threatening chances at all, and yet they scored 2 goals, which you can sort of take in a long run. You perhaps from a managerial perspective or a management perspective can kind of look back and say, okay, yeah, we didn't win that game, we drew. But if we play that way again, we're gonna win because they got 2 worldies or a worldly goal and a deflection to get their goals, and so
right.
It's a way. I mean, that's what all advanced stats are. What they call the advanced stats. What they're trying to do is how do we quantify the things that are happening beyond just counting certain things that are happening? How can we help us understand what's happening on the field? And how do we judge and rate certain players beyond simply did they score a goal or not?
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, so that explains to me intra-game XG, but I have seen before a game starts, there's going to be an XG for each team, I think, right?
No, I've never seen that. Usually it might be a cumulative statistic for them on the season.
Okay.
Or a per game basis, but it would be based on what they've done before. Because the game hasn't happened, the expected goals is only about the game itself and specifically what's happened.
Okay.
But again, that'll be another thing they can sort of judge. You look at a team you look at their record and think, wow, they're racking up a lot of wins. They're doing really well. But then you look at their XG and it's kind of even saying, they're getting a little lucky here. They've maybe stolen a few points. And so the idea is they may regress. And so I know their record looks good, but I don't think they're that good.
Interesting. Okay.
And the other way too, right? A team going, they've dropped some points. They've dropped some points along the way, but you look at their XG and go, no, don't treat them like a mid-table team. They're dangerous. You got to be careful.
Right. That's good to know. Yeah. One thing that's come up recently, I forget which match this really bubbled to the top of my head, but so we've talked before about how the captain's role is he's the one player who's allowed to talk to the ref, right? And we know in practice, yes, everybody does. And there's, as long as you don't cross a certain line in the way you're talking to the ref, it's usually tolerated. But then we've also talked about the 4th official and that he's part of him being there is that he's someone who the managers can talk to. Is an official allowed to, or do they ever actually change a decision based on a conversation with somebody? Like, what is the purpose of them talking to an official? Is it more to explain, so it's considered for, let's say a cumulative yellow card or something like that? Like, oh, hey, it may have looked like that, but it was really something else. Like, what do those conversations usually look like?
Sometimes it is a chance to explain yourself or explain to your team. A lot of times we say the captain talks to the official. Really, we mean the official talks to the captain. And explains the decisions he's been making. And this is kind of a general one. You'll see them talk to the managers as well. Sometimes it's about working the referees. And so, you keep calling that against us. Did you notice how he was doing this to me? You called us for it. Why didn't you call him for it? And so you start talking to the referee as a way to say, hey, they're doing that thing that you've been penalizing us for. Or at least they claim that. Sometimes it's working the referees, and there are ways managers and players will sort of say things during a game or even before the game to kind of goad the referees one way or another, or just plant little doubts in their mind about how they're calling the game or doing certain things. There's a lot of mental games there. Usually, if you see a referee change his call, it's because the officials themselves have gathered.
Right.
Sometimes with obviously a lot of times with VAR, but sometimes just that sometimes the two talk and the linesman saw something that the official did and says, hey, you need to deal with this. Rarely do you see that. Usually it's more about the referee explaining a decision. I'm trying to think if I've ever actually seen an official's decision changed because of a complaint a player made. You might see it delayed long enough, or perhaps sometimes it's a delaying tactic to get VAR involved because of a particular thing, or sometimes you'll have them goading, say, hey, no, check VAR. I didn't do that thing that you said I did. But I don't think that and maybe this is a thing that happened more in the older days when there were fewer cameras, fewer replays, and all that. That the officials were we're more susceptible to those conversations. I don't know, but I don't think I've ever actually seen that. Usually, it's an opportunity for the players to vent, or the managers to vent a little bit,
Okay.
rather than actually change a decision that's been made.
Yeah, that makes sense. So this coming weekend will begin a new sequence of matches for Arsenal, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Which speaking of key words that we're bringing up. So again, another. It's essentially a bye week, so it's international break, so it's a good time to catch up on your reading on the Athletic. An interesting piece from Arteta about Mikel Arteta's use of sequences, and what I enjoyed most about this is it actually mirrors or mimics a lot of the way we have talked about the schedule a little bit this season, which makes me feel kind of smart. But the idea is that you can break the season down. You're not thinking of it as like whole chunks of the season, but you're kind of breaking it down into these small chunks and thinking of several games in sequence. And the piece talks about how Arteta approaches those tactically, how he thinks about them in terms of rotating players, where breaks fit into the season. So as they basically put it, they've broken the season so far into 3 different sections to this point. The first one being the first 3 games. That was Wolves, Villa, and Brighton, which took us into the first international break, and then broke the recent sequence into 2 groups. We had the 3 away games, Spurs, Atalanta, City. Kind of treated the Bolton Wanderers game as kind of a breather there in the middle, which when you watch the game kind of makes sense. And then then the 3 home games in sequence: Leicester, Paris, and Southampton. And the idea is that it's within those sequences of games that you think about player minutes, that you think about tactics, you think about practicing. So we're not practicing for one game and one opponent; we're practicing for the next 2 or 3, and sort of try to think ahead about how we're doing that and how we're moving around players and the like. And it's something I think I've kind of always suspected is the case. It's kind of interesting to hear them just out and out say it that. But what's kind of interesting, as I suspect, as we look, there's we've got an interesting set of sequences coming up, coming out of this, between this international break and the next one in mid-November. We've got with an away Premier League game at Bournemouth on the weekend. Then we'll have Shakhtar Donetsk at home in the Champions League, and then Liverpool at home the following weekend. So a relatively easy road game, and then 2 home games, difficult for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Last week in October, that's the 30th, I think it's that Tuesday, at Preston North End, so the League Cup, weaker opponents. And after that, 3 consecutive away games: Newcastle, Inter Milan, Chelsea. 3 games we have all, are going to be very interesting and very important in terms of how the league shakes out this year. So
right.
You can start to see that idea of the sequencing, and it'll be interesting what might be an interesting thing to think about as we watch those games over the coming weeks. Do we sort of see patterns of player usage, of tactical things over the course of different sequences of games, rather than thinking about each game discretely, or thinking about the entire season as one giant thing and you break it up into smaller chunks?
Yeah, it's a good approach. Okay, so I guess that brings us to what's coming up for next week.
Right. So first, we'll wrap up the international break. Again, USA-Mexico on Tuesday in Guadalajara, if you're interested in that. From our perspective, World Cup qualifying, we have Japan home to Australia, Colombia home to Chile, and Argentina home against Bolivia. And then, for the reason you're really all on this show, the Arsenal's back. They're going to play away to Bournemouth on Saturday morning. That game is, if World Soccer Talk is correct, on NBC, the big network. So that'll be nice. But yeah, Bournemouth, not an easy opponent, but a game we should feel confident in, even as an away game.
Right. Yeah, should be exciting. I will conclude the show with thanking everyone for joining us at Gooner U. If you're watching on YouTube, you can also listen to our show on Apple, Spotify, and some other places. And don't forget to catch out our shorts. If you're only listening, try watching us on YouTube with the link in the show notes. Your homework for today is to rate the show on your podcast app of choice. So seek it out and give us 5 stars. We really appreciate it. Help more people find the show. We record using Zencastr. If you'd like to try it out, you can support Gooner U by signing up using the link in the description, which also has links to everything we talk about on the show, as well as our social pages. Again, my name is Dove, and you can find me on Twitter at Dove Frankel. With me, as always, is Keith, and you can find him in a pub watching Arsenal matches.
So go you Gunners.